The night was thick and hot, the kind of night that sticks to your skin, the kind of night when even the air seems to sweat. Memphis, 1954. The Sun Studio was a tiny place, just a room with a few instruments, a tape recorder, and a guy named Sam Phillips, who thought he could make magic happen. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the studio was empty except for a few people. Sam, a guitarist named Scotty Moore, a bassist named Bill Black, and a young, nervous singer with a mop of dark hair and a voice that had yet to find its place in the world. Elvis Presley was that young singer. He stood in the middle of the room, holding a guitar, trying to sound cool but feeling anything but. He had been there for hours, trying to nail a few songs, but nothing was working. His voice sounded flat, and his nerves were getting the best of him. Sam had heard countless singers come through his studio, but there was something about this kid that made him curious. Maybe it was the way Elvis moved, or the way he held his guitar, or maybe it was just a gut feeling. The tension in the room was palpable. Scotty and Bill were starting to get restless. They had their own gigs to play, and this kid wasn't exactly setting the world on fire. But then something changed. During a break, Elvis started to play a song by a black blues singer named Arthur Big Boy Crudup. It was a song called That's All Right, Mama. At first, it was just Elvis fooling around, a way to blow off some steam. But as he played, something clicked. His voice loosened up, and a smile spread across his face. Scotty and Bill noticed the change and joined in, and suddenly the room was alive. Sam, who had been watching from the control room, couldn't believe what he was hearing. The raw energy, the mix of black and white sounds, the pure, unfiltered emotion, it was something he had never heard before. He opened the door and stepped into the studio. "What are you all doing?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Elvis, still in the moment, looked up. "Just goofing," he replied, grinning. Sam's face split into a grin. "Well, that sounds pretty good. Back up and let's put it on tape." And just like that, everything changed. The tape recorder whirred to life, capturing the magic of that moment. Sam added a touch of echo, a subtle effect that made Elvis's voice sound otherworldly, like it was coming from somewhere deep and mysterious. It was the first time he had used that effect on a white singer, and it worked like a charm. When the recording was over, Sam played it back. The room fell silent, and then, one by one, they all started to smile. They had something special, something that could change the world. Sam knew it, and so did Elvis. That night in a tiny studio in Memphis, the sound of rock and roll was born. It was a sound that would define a generation, a sound that would make Elvis Presley a legend. But it was also the beginning of a journey that would end with Elvis's untimely death and the rise of a myth that would live on long after he was gone. The end, as they say, is where we start from. The moment Sam Phillips captured Elvis Presley's sound on tape, he knew he had found something special. Phillips had always dreamed of finding a white singer who could capture the soul and feel of African American music. This was a daring idea in the 1950s, when racial segregation and prejudice were deeply rooted in the southern United States. African Americans and white Americans rarely mixed, and when they did, it was on unequal terms. It was a time when Rosa Parks had not yet refused to give up her seat on a bus, and Martin Luther King Jr. had not yet delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Sam Phillips wasn't just a dreamer, he was a visionary. He worked with musicians from both sides of the racial divide, recording legends like Roy Orbison, Johnny Cash, B.B. King, and Ike Turner. He believed that if he could blend the music of these two traditions, he would make a fortune. And he was right, though most of that fortune would go to others. Elvis's rise to fame was swift and dramatic. He burst onto the music scene with a style that was both refreshing and shocking. His performances were explosive, with his hips swiveling and his body moving in ways that many found too sexual. Middle America, with its conservative values, saw Elvis as a threat to the morals of young people. His music, rooted in African American traditions, was seen as a dangerous influence. Elvis's appeal was powerful and far-reaching. His music and style crossed racial boundaries, challenging the norms of the time. He didn't just perform music. He used his body as an instrument, moving in a way that was both sensual and expressive. This was more than just entertainment, it was a cultural revolution. Young people in particular were drawn to Elvis. They saw him as a symbol of freedom and rebellion against the old, rigid ways. Elvis's impact was so significant that it drew the attention of influential figures like Frank Sinatra, who criticized the new sound of rock and roll. Sinatra described it as brutal, ugly, degenerate, and vicious, and called it a negative influence on young people. But for many, Elvis's music was a breath of fresh air, a new voice in a changing world. Elvis's success was also a product of his timing. He emerged just as a new generation of young people, with money to spend and a desire to make their own choices, was starting to shape the culture. They were tired of the old, polished music of their parents, and were drawn to the raw, energetic sounds of rock and roll. Elvis was the perfect storm of talent, timing, and image. He had a unique voice, a charismatic stage presence, and a style that was all his own. But fame came at a cost. As Elvis's popularity grew, so did the pressure to maintain his image and meet the demands of his record label, RCA. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, saw the potential for even greater success and pushed Elvis into a series of films and performances that sometimes felt formulaic and unchallenging. When Elvis joined the Army in 1958, his image began to change. His wild, rebellious edge was softened, and he became more of an all-American icon. After his military service, Elvis continued to perform, but the edge was gone. Society had changed, and the sexual revolution of the 1960s made his earlier performances seem less shocking. He added gospel music to his repertoire, and his once revolutionary style became more mainstream. Despite his success, Elvis struggled with the pressures of fame. He turned to drugs and became increasingly reclusive, spending more time in hotel suites and less on stage. In his later years, Elvis was a shadow of his former self. His performances were often lackluster, and his health was visibly declining. He toured relentlessly, but the spark that had made him a legend was fading. Fans watched in sadness as the king of rock and roll struggled with the weight of his fame and the demands of his lifestyle. Despite the challenges, Elvis's legacy endures. He remains a symbol of the power of music to bring people together and challenge the status quo. His music and his story continue to inspire new generations, reminding them that sometimes the most revolutionary acts are the ones that come from the heart. The day Elvis Presley died, August 16, 1977, was a turning point not just for his fans but for the world. It was a moment that people would never forget, a flashbulb memory that seared itself into the minds of those who were alive to witness it. For many, it felt like losing a close friend or family member, even though they had never met him in person. Elvis's last concert was on June 26, 1977, in Indianapolis. The audience was wild with excitement, but the images and recordings from that night show a different side of Elvis. He looked pale and sweaty, his face puffy from the medication he had been taking. Despite his physical state, he gave it his all, performing his final song, Can't Help Falling in Love, and handing out his last scarf to a fan. After the show, he returned to Graceland, his home in Memphis, Tennessee. The house was unusually quiet, as some of his closest friends, known as the Memphis Mafia, were no longer welcome there. Elvis felt betrayed by two of his former bodyguards, Sonny and Red West, who were writing a book that exposed his personal struggles and flaws. Deep down, Elvis knew his life needed to change. He talked about quitting drugs and firing his manager, but it was too late. On the morning of August 16th, Elvis was found dead in his bathroom. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, said his last words were, "I'm going to the bathroom to read." Paramedics were called, but they couldn't revive him. The news spread quickly, and the world was in shock. Fans gathered at Graceland, leaving flowers and messages. The media descended on Memphis, turning Elvis's funeral into a spectacle. Over 100,000 people lined the streets to pay their respects, and hundreds more filed past his open casket at Graceland. The impact of Elvis's death was profound. For many, it was a wake-up call about the dangers of fame and the toll it can take on a person. Some fans refused to believe he was gone, insisting that he was still alive and hiding somewhere. They clung to the hope that he would return, like a modern-day resurrection. This belief in Elvis's survival became a subculture of its own, with conspiracy theories and fan clubs dedicated to the idea that he was still out there. For others, Elvis's death was a turning point in their lives. Kiki Apostolakos, a Greek woman who had never been particularly interested in Elvis before, was so moved by his passing that she moved to Memphis to be closer to him. She visited his grave every day, cleaning it and leaving fresh flowers. She saw her visits as a form of prayer and devotion, a way to connect with Elvis on a deeper level. Elvis's influence continued to grow even after his death. His music remained popular, and new generations discovered his songs. Academics began to study his life and legacy, writing books and articles that explored his impact on American culture. Elvis became a symbol of the American dream, the poor boy from Tupelo who rose to become the king of rock and roll. But he was more than just a symbol of success. He was also a symbol of the dangers of fame and the complexities of human nature. Elvis's ability to connect with people on an emotional level was unparalleled. His voice, rich and intimate, could make listeners feel like he was singing directly to them. Whether he was performing early rock and roll hits or soulful ballads, Elvis had a way of touching the hearts of his audience. His music transcended genres and generations, making him a universal icon. But Elvis was more than just a voice. His image, from the early days of rebellion to the later years of Vegas glamour, was equally powerful. He was a visual icon, a symbol of charisma and charm. Even in his final days, when he was struggling with his health, Elvis's image remained iconic. The photographs and videos from that time captured a different side of him, a more vulnerable and human side, but they also reinforced his status as a legend. Elvis's legacy is complex and multifaceted. He represents the American dream, the idea that anyone can achieve greatness through hard work and talent. But he also represents the darker side of fame, the isolation and addiction that can come with it. For many, Elvis became a kind of saint, a figure of almost divine status. Fans saw him as a charismatic mediator between the everyday world and a higher spiritual realm. They believed that he could still communicate with them even after his death, through his music and the memories they shared. Elvis's death marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a new one. His music and image continued to evolve, inspiring new generations and new interpretations. Elvis became a cultural phenomenon, a figure who transcended time and place. He was no longer just a singer or a performer. He was a legend, a symbol of a bygone era, and a beacon of hope for those who believed in the power of music to change the world. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was a complex figure, especially when it came to his relationship with African American culture. For many African Americans, Elvis was a mix of admiration and resentment. On one hand, he was a white boy who brought black music to the masses, but on the other, he was seen as someone who profited from it without always giving proper credit. Elvis grew up in the South, in a place where the lines between black and white were starkly drawn. He was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, a town known for its racial tensions. His family was poor, and they often lived in areas where African Americans also resided. As a teenager, Elvis would hang out in Memphis bars, watching African American musicians perform. He was deeply inspired by artists like Bo Diddley and Little Richard, and it wasn't long before he started incorporating their styles into his own music. Little Richard, one of the most influential musicians of the time, pointed out the financial disparities between white and black performers. He claimed that while Elvis earned $25,000 for performing 3 songs in a film, he only received $5,000. This disparity fueled the resentment that many black artists felt. Little Richard even said, "If it wasn't for me, Elvis would starve," highlighting the debt Elvis owed to black musicians. Despite this, Elvis's connection to African American culture was genuine. He often spoke about his respect for black musicians and how they influenced his style. However, a damaging quote attributed to him, "The only thing Negroes can do for me is shine my shoes and buy my records," has haunted his legacy. Many writers have tried to verify this quote, but it's now believed to be a fabrication. Elvis grew up in poverty, and his family had lived in the black area of Tupelo. He ran errands for a local African American grocery store, which taught him tolerance but also stigmatized his family in the eyes of many white residents. Elvis's personal life also reflected his complex relationship with race. He and his cousin Gene Smith dated 2 black girls, but when they were spotted by white police officers, they were threatened with violence. They only avoided a beating, by explaining they were practicing with a gospel choir. This incident shows the racial tensions of the time and how Elvis navigated them. Later in his career, Elvis was endorsed by many celebrated African American artists. Little Richard, despite his earlier criticisms, once said, "Elvis was an integrator, a blessing. They wouldn't let black music through. He opened the door for black music." This statement acknowledges the role Elvis played in bringing black music to a wider audience. However, the issue of race and Elvis's legacy never fully went away. In 2004, Jack Soden, the CEO of Elvis Presley Enterprises, addressed the challenge of maintaining Elvis's image. He emphasized that Elvis acknowledged his early influences were black musicians and always credited them. He also pointed out that Elvis was not prejudiced and had many black friends. One of Elvis's most famous songs, An American Trilogy, further muddies the waters. This medley, which includes Dixie, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and All My Trials, was a powerful performance in his shows. The song combines Civil War-era tunes, including a ballad with roots in slave music. While some saw it as a patriotic song, others interpreted it with irony, given the context of the Vietnam War and the political climate of the 1970s. Elvis's visit to the White House in 1970, where he met President Nixon, is another intriguing part of his legacy. He offered his services to the government's anti-drugs campaign, an episode that has spawned many conspiracy theories. Some fans believe Elvis never died and was instead spirited away by the authorities to work undercover. The Confederate flag, a symbol often associated with Elvis fans, adds another layer to the complexity. While it represents political conservatism in the South, it has also become a symbol of Elvis's Southern roots. The flag's association with slavery and segregation is often overlooked in the context of Elvis's music and legacy. Elvis's story is more than just a tale of musical success. It's a story of bridging racial divides, of suffering and triumph, and of an archetype that resonates across cultures. His journey from poverty to stardom, and his fusion of black and white music, made him a symbol of a changing America. Whether seen as a hero, a flawed king, or a modern icon, Elvis's legacy continues to inspire and provoke discussion. His music, his style, and his impact on popular culture ensure that his influence will be felt for generations to come. Elvis Presley's will was a detailed document, filed just days after his death. It was written by a Memphis lawyer named Drayton Beecher Smith, and witnessed by Elvis's fiancée, Ginger Alden, his friend Charlie Hodge, and the lawyer's wife, Ann Dewey Smith. The will made it clear that Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie, was his only heir. Her grandfather, Vernon, would manage her inheritance until she turned 25. Both Vernon and Lisa's great-grandmother, Minnie Mee, would be provided for from the estate's income. No one else, not even Elvis's ex-wife Priscilla or his fiancée Ginger, received any provision. The public and the media expected Elvis to leave behind a massive fortune. After all, he had earned millions over his career. Some years his income topped $5 million, which would be around $30 million today. People thought Lisa Marie would inherit about $150 million, but the official valuation of Elvis's estate came as a shock. Instead of being a multimillionaire, Elvis was down to his last $1 million in the bank, including all his property and personal items. His total wealth was just $7 million. This was a huge disappointment, especially when you consider the costs Elvis had to cover. Graceland, his mansion, cost $500,000 a year to maintain. He also had a large entourage to pay, and his lavish lifestyle and generous spending habits had left him nearly broke. When Elvis died, his father, Vernon, was left to manage the estate for Lisa Marie, but Vernon wasn't good with money. He had no business skills, and had even been jailed for writing bad checks in his youth. Vernon turned to Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, for help. The colonel returned to Memphis with a contract ready for Vernon to sign. He told Vernon that nothing had changed, and that showing any weakness would cause everything to fall apart. But the colonel knew that a dead Elvis could be even more profitable than a living one. He quickly signed Vernon into a deal that gave him 50% control of the Elvis business, just like he had while Elvis was alive. However, the colonel's control was about to be challenged. When Vernon died just 2 years after Elvis, the estate had to be returned to the probate court. Lisa Marie's mother, Priscilla, and the other trustees were shocked to discover the true state of Elvis's finances. They had no idea how bad things were. They had trusted the colonel, but a Memphis attorney named Blanchard Toole was appointed to investigate. His 300-page report was harsh. Toole found that the colonel had been taking advantage of Elvis for years. For example, in 1973, the colonel sold Elvis's future royalties from RCA Records for $5,400,000, a fraction of their real value. After paying taxes and the colonel's cut, Elvis was left with only $1,350,000. This money was mostly used to settle his divorce with Priscilla. Toole also discovered that the colonel was receiving secret payments from RCA, which Elvis knew nothing about. The colonel also controlled a company called Boxcar Enterprises, which handled merchandising rights. By 1977, the colonel owned 56% of Boxcar, while the Presley estate had only 22%. Toole explained that Elvis was naive and easily dominated by the colonel's strong personality. This exploitation had left Elvis's estate in a precarious position, and it was up to the trustees to clean up the mess and secure Lisa Marie's future. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had a way of making deals that seemed to benefit him more than Elvis. He'd take a cut from Elvis's earnings and expect gifts from record companies, hotels, and promoters, which he never shared. Parker even undersold Elvis in a Vegas deal to get gambling credit for himself. This one-sided relationship reminded biographer Alana Nash of a troubled marriage where one partner dominates the other. She thought Elvis was like a battered wife who didn't want to leave because it was all he knew and didn't think he was worth anything better. Parker kept Elvis in the dark about how big of a star he was and how other managers handled their clients. He didn't want Elvis to mingle with other stars because they might talk business and realize Parker wasn't the best manager. Parker's self-serving deals didn't just hurt Elvis while he was alive. They continued to damage the estate after his death. When Elvis died, Parker wasted no time. Just 48 hours later, he signed a deal with a merchandising company to use Elvis's name and likeness. This deal was just the beginning of a series of unethical agreements that Parker made, often with the help of RCA Records. These actions were seen as collusion, fraud, and misrepresentation. The estate's attorney advised that Parker should no longer have any involvement with Lisa Marie's affairs, and should repay everything he had earned from the Presley business since Elvis's death. Parker fought back, filing a counterclaim that he was Elvis's business partner and deserved half of his assets. This was a ridiculous claim, but Parker's strategy was to drag out the legal battle to push the estate to the brink of bankruptcy. He knew he could afford a long fight, and the estate couldn't. Parker's plan worked for a while, and by 1981, the estate was running at a $160,000 annual deficit. The IRS also hit the estate with a $10 million tax bill. In 1983, the estate and Parker finally reached an out-of-court settlement. Parker agreed to give up any claims to Elvis's assets in exchange for over $2 million from RCA Records. RCA also paid the estate $1,100,000 in royalties. Priscilla, Elvis's ex-wife, took control of Elvis's affairs on behalf of their daughter, Lisa Marie. She had no business experience but was tough and had a natural talent for it. Priscilla discovered that the estate had lost a lot of money and that Graceland, Elvis's mansion, might have to be auctioned. The family graves, including Elvis's, were a big concern. Fans had already visited the graves unofficially, and the idea of moving them was distressing. Priscilla decided to open Graceland as a museum. She hired Jack Soden, a business expert, to help. Soden wasn't a fan, which Priscilla thought was a good thing because he could make tough business decisions without being emotional. It cost $500,000 to convert Graceland into a tourist attraction. Priscilla and Soden toured other famous homes and attractions for ideas. They decided to bus visitors across the road to Graceland and used Disney-like tour guides. The house was cleaned up, and the decor was changed to make it more appealing. Graceland opened to the public on June 7, 1982, and it was a huge success. They recouped their investment in less than 40 days, and Graceland became a key part of Memphis's tourism. Priscilla's biggest challenge was managing Elvis's brand. She had to control the use of his image and likeness to ensure the estate benefited. After Elvis's death, unofficial traders flooded the market with Elvis merchandise, but little of the money made it back to the estate. Priscilla had to take control to protect Elvis's legacy and ensure that his daughter and the estate received the benefits they deserved. The Colonel had a knack for making quick cash, but this time his deal with Factors Inc. was different. He was more interested in the immediate payday than in building a lasting legacy. Factors Inc. was in charge of managing Elvis's image and likeness, but they were pretty inconsistent about it. Sometimes they were strict, and other times they were lax, especially when it came to controlling Elvis memorabilia. Sid Shaw, a British businessman who founded Elvisly Yours, noticed this inconsistency. He said Factors Inc. was very poor at policing the Elvis market, and Elvis products were sold everywhere in the USA. Despite this, when Sid started selling popular Elvis busts in the UK, Factors Inc. sent a threatening letter. Sid ignored it, and soon after, Factors Inc. went bankrupt in Britain. Jack Soden, who was now managing Elvis's business, saw the potential that Sid and other independent sellers were tapping into. This confirmed his and Priscilla's fears. If they didn't take control, they'd lose out on future profits. Controlling a celebrity's image is a tricky balance. If you're too lenient, you lose control. If you're too strict, you push fans away. Priscilla and Jack believed that if they protected their legal rights fiercely, the fans would stay loyal. They said they wanted to protect Elvis's memory, but they also wanted the estate to make the most money from it. The Elvis estate, now known as Elvis Presley Enterprises EP, became so protective of Elvis's image that it earned a reputation as the Darth Vader of the merchandising licensing business. They were known for their aggressive legal tactics. However, they often forgot that Elvis himself was a fan of imitation and appropriation. He didn't mind how people used his image, and he created his own identity from various sources. Sid Shaw, the British businessman, faced a lot of legal battles with EP. They demanded he pay huge royalties for selling Elvis products in the USA. When he refused, they took him to court. Sid compared the meeting to a Spanish Inquisition and was determined to keep fighting. Despite losing the battle to sell in the USA, Sid succeeded internationally and turned his battles into a story of the little guy standing up to a giant corporation. Other entrepreneurs gave in to EP demands, but Jack Soden was clear about his goals. He wanted to run our own business and not have every little schlocky guy around ripping off Elvis. EP mission was to clear the swamp of unauthorized and tacky products that appeared after Elvis's death. They wanted to protect the integrity of Elvis's image and ensure it remained valuable. Even artists faced EP legal might. In 1999, a Danish choreographer named Peter Schaafus created a ballet about Elvis. It was a hit in Denmark, but when he tried to bring it to the UK, EP threatened legal action. Schaafus had to change the ballet storyline and remove Elvis's songs. Despite winning many legal battles, EP aggressive tactics often backfired. They lost public sympathy, and the legal costs were high. However, these early legal actions helped EP establish its rights and protect its commercial interests. Without them, Elvis's image might have become generic and lost its cultural value. Over time, EP learned to be less heavy-handed. They now embrace the diverse ways fans celebrate Elvis, as long as it doesn't hurt their profits. For example, Elvis Week, which started as an unofficial fan event, is now an EP-sanctioned celebration. Fans bring home made tributes to Graceland, and while these are unlicensed, they also buy official souvenirs and stay at Graceland-owned hotels. In 1984, two of Elvis's private jets, Hound Dog II and Lisa Marie, were brought back to Graceland and put on display. In 1989, the Elvis Presley Automobile Museum opened, featuring cars like his famous pink Cadillac. In 1991, Graceland was listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2006, it became a National Historic Landmark. The U.S. Postal Service also released an Elvis stamp in 1993, which became the most profitable stamp in American history, generating a $36 million profit in under a year. Elvis's image is now a global subculture, shaped and reinterpreted by fans in countless ways. EP has learned to balance legal control with fan creativity, ensuring both the cultural legacy and commercial success of the king. On February 1, 1993, Lisa Marie Presley turned 25 and inherited her father's estate. Fans worried she might make big changes, but everything stayed the same. Her mom, Priscilla, and the National Bank of Commerce kept managing the business with the same team. Priscilla was relieved because she didn't want Lisa Marie's husband, Danny Keough, getting involved. She was right to worry, as the marriage didn't last. In 1994, Lisa Marie married Michael Jackson, another music legend. Fans were shocked and worried, especially because of the rumors about Michael. They feared he might close Graceland to the public. But the couple signed a prenup, and when they divorced, everyone went back to how they were before. Lisa Marie's management of Graceland was steady and careful. They opened the Heartbreak Hotel near Graceland, which was popular but needed renovations after a while. The Graceland business made about $40 million a year from royalties, licensing, and visitors. They kept the image of Elvis clean and heroic, leaving out the darker parts of his life. In 2004, a rich businessman named Robert F.X. Sillerman bought most of the Elvis Presley business for $100 million. Lisa Marie kept Graceland and some personal items but got $53 million in cash. She said it was to protect her father's legacy. Some fans were upset and thought she should have sold shares instead. Sillerman had big plans to expand Graceland and bring Elvis-related attractions to other parts of the world. Graceland started advertising on TV for the first time in 2005, trying to show Elvis as a fun and genuine person. The marketing changed over the years, and some fans felt the true spirit of Elvis was lost. They thought Graceland was too commercialized and wanted more respect and consideration. In 2004, some fans even talked about boycotting Elvis Week events. They felt management ignored their concerns about the care of Elvis's items and the quality of events. Graceland's CEO, Jack Soden, responded with a letter saying they cared about the fans and would make changes. With Sillerman's investment, Graceland had more money for projects, but it also meant Graceland's success was tied to other businesses. Sillerman's company, CKX, bought 19 Entertainment, which made shows like American Idol. Graceland planned to build a big entertainment district around the mansion, but it was tough for small businesses nearby. One shop, Memories of Elvis, had to close after 27 years because Graceland bought the building. Despite the changes, Graceland remained a place where fans could connect with Elvis. It was a mix of business and emotion, where the legacy of the king of rock and roll lived on, even as the world around it changed.